Wuthering Heights, or should I say quote-unquote Wuthering Heights. I have so many mixed thoughts about this as a whole. One, I am not always a purist who thinks that adaptations have to be a perfect one-for-one recreation of the source material. I'm cool with things if they want to switch a couple things up, explore different avenues if it's done well. And I'm even less averse to it when it's something like Wuthering Heights, which is in public domain, so it means that tomorrow someone could decide to make a new one if they wanted to. There have been attempts in the past in many languages and interpretations, and many more will come in the future. In the grand scheme of things, I really don't think this movie is causing that much damage, except you might end up with more people reading the book. Which brings me to my next point. I kind of had a personal vendetta against this book in high school. I literally have a photo album of me burning these notes after we finished the segment, and I wasn't usually someone who disliked the books that I was given to read in school, including other classics like The Count of Monte Cristo. But I hated Wuthering Heights when I read it. I think maybe it was how it was presented to us, or maybe it was just a little bit too stuffy in the reading. I do think that maybe we represented this a little bit more as a romance than it ended up being, so then it's way easier to be like, well, every single one of these people is horrible, and I don't want any of them to have good things, and the bad things that are happening to them aren't bad enough to make up for what I've been put through. But I actually went back and checked that photo album to see some of the comments, and it was all variations of Wuthering Heights can burn in hell, I think I love you, I fucking hate Wuthering Heights, and my personal favorite, yay, good has bbeen restored into the universe, which is essentially the evil has been defeated before Cabin in the Woods even had time to come out. And that was all other girls in the class, so we all seem to be on the same page about this book, and we like that teacher, so there's definitely something up. Now, for those unaware about the base plot of what Wuthering Heights is, it's pretty well this gothic ghost story, both with ghosts that should be taken as literal and figurative ones. Figuratively in the sense that the events that we're learning about have all already taken place, and some characters are long dead, but their presence is just still so heavily felt. And then at times characters are literally claiming to see ghosts. The tale's all being relayed to us through a variety of narrators, coming to us through the initial narrator, Mr. Lockwood, an outsider learning about the sordid events years later. An aspect that a lot of the adaptations, including this one, don't super concern themselves with, which right from the jump is going to change things because we are getting information from someone who's already probably editing it because it happened so long ago and they're trying to make themselves look better in the story. That's getting passed down to this guy who has his own biases and ego, and then whatever he remembers is what we're hearing. So we're not even getting those layers through the story, which I get it. It'd be a lot to put to a single movie, but it is possible. But when you're talking about the book, that isn't something to be separated because it's just so essential to the story, and it really lets you know how many levels of unreliable narrator you're dealing with. But the aspect of the story that most people concern themselves with is the destructive relationship between Katherine Earnshaw and a young orphan her father brings home, Heathcliff. So you do have a lot of people who just take it as this tragic romance, which Emerald Fennell has absolutely done with this movie. Honestly, it just seems like Wuthering Heights was her posh Twilight, and I'm also pretty sure that Stephenie Meyer takes a similar interpretation of the story while acknowledging that the characters are horrible just based on the way that she has Bella talking about it in Eclipse, thinking that the love between Katherine and Heathcliff is their only redeeming quality when that's actually the thing that causes the most damage. It's a possessive love that just leads to destruction and hate. But yeah, Stephenie Meyer really loves to parallel those classics. But I digress. I shan't turn this into another Twilight video, even if it feels like this, again, this book was like Twilight to Emerald Fennell.
Well, I first read the book when I was 14. It was just the most thrilling experience. And so turning it into a film, I wanted to reflect that first experience.
I don't even think that's a bad way to approach an adaptation. It's how Alex Garland approached Annihilation, and it just kind of let him distill the themes and imagery that would really stick without getting bogged down in how many details are in that book. But again, the key word I said there was distill all the themes. This adaptation is ignoring most of the key themes of the book. But even that I feel is something that could be interesting, like the way that you read something when you're younger, the feeling that it instills inside you, the things that you hone in on the most. I do actually think that's a really interesting way to approach certain media because it helps you get inside the mindset of someone. But I also fully understand why people have issues with this. But I also, I get where she's coming from. This book does have some of the most absurdly romantic lines ever, or things that just get taken as such strong, devoted love. Like Katherine saying, he shall never know I love him, and that not because he's handsome, but because he's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. And later Heathcliff saying if he loved with all the powers of his puny being, he couldn't love as much in 80 years as I could in a day. Yeah, of course, if you're young and you're going through the development of life and all your emotions and your hormones are just so heightened, you're gonna read lines like that and be like, oh my God, I wish someone loved me that much. But the point is once you get through the book, you should be like, may a love like that never find me. So many people want that kind of love that's all-consuming, but so few stories actually engage with all the ways that that can go wrong. How unsustainable it is when you care more about the love itself and what it means for you than the person that is actually infecting your mind. It actually becomes selfish in how obsessive it is. And that's before we even get into some of the social issues that let this build up to the disaster it is in the book, but it is so much about two people who have very few redeeming qualities and cause so much damage to everyone around them in their obsessive pursuits and don't give a singular fuck as long as they feel like they're getting some kind of semblance of a win. And that's not love. It's really brutal stuff, and there are so many other elements going on here. There's cycles of abuse, there's anger and vengeance, there's racial and class elements, and the way they infect every aspect of a culture, trickling down to the next generation, almost doomed to repeat it unless somebody stops. And this book is trying to do that. We get the next generation and how that all started passing down, how the obsessive love is just a catalyst for that damage. And it's impressive that a lot of those themes, particularly the depravity and toxicity of the relationships leading to trauma, were explored in a time where that school of thought was just starting to develop, like modern psychology was not a thing. So I gotta admit, stuffy as the book may be, it's pretty impressive for a 15-year-old to pull this together. Amazing what you can achieve while learning the arts at home with wealth. And to be fair, I get that the learning at home part came after a couple of their siblings died of tuberculosis while they were away at boarding school that had some pretty harsh conditions, but still. I was going to school and working at Pretzel Maker when I was 15. But if this movie ended up making you want to pull your hair out, you need today's sponsor, Kitsch. I've been using Kitsch for about a year now, and it's been great for helping repair my hair after I got sick and noticed it getting way more brittle and falling out more. Because they have a full line of hair care products dedicated to keeping your hair healthy and looking good. In terms of the shampoo and conditioner, I'm a big fan of swapping between the rosemary and biotin bars to help with volume and strength, and the rice water protein bars for growth, balanced moisture, and stronger strands. And because they come in bar form, they're so useful to someone like me who travels a lot, sometimes for weeks on end. I don't need to worry about shampoo taking up space as a liquid. I can just break off chunks and chuck them in my bag, which also makes them better for the environment because they take less water to make and ship without a plastic bottle. With the bar bags, you get a nice thick lather that helps the bars last longer, and you can pair them with the shower caddy or my personal favorite, the self-draining dish to help save on space. But they have so many other accessories to help you on your hair journey from shower to bed, and a variety of other post-shower products like scalp oil, heat protection spray, and a hair wax stick to help with the stragglers you'll get with the hair growth. I'm gonna need to use a little bit of that before I leave the house. There's a reason why they've sold over 16 million shampoo and conditioner bars, so if you want to try out some new hair care for yourself and save 25% off your order, click my link in the description down below and the discount will auto-apply at checkout. I guess the point being, I have since reread the book for this video, and I definitely appreciate it more while still fully understanding why the writing style just might not feel great to a lot of people. I also feel like I now have a better appreciation for flawed characters and unreliable narrators that makes this a much better read versus just the frustration I remember feeling and just hating these characters. I feel like it was before I realized okay, just because someone's a protagonist doesn't mean that they are the moral compass of a story, and it is okay to read something without having a moral compass, but I get why some people just don't like that. And there are some moments of this movie that tap into that. They do show some moments of Katherine and Heathcliff being quite cruel, but so much of that is coming about by trying to cut corners and speedrun aspects so you have time to add in more moments of sexual affair. But even that aspect wasn't as intense as the marketing and early screenings would have led me to believe. It is erotic, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of sexual moments, especially when compared to the novel that's essentially all just brutal yearning and no touching. But the way people were talking about this, I thought it was going to put Saltburn to shame. And someone slurps cum water out of a tub drain in that movie and then fucks a grave. Something that probably would have felt a little bit more at home in this movie, and they don't even go for it. So other than a couple moments where it feels a little bit racier, it is pretty tame. And I'm not saying I wanted it to be that way, but I was just expecting it to be more volatile considering some of those early reviews and just the chaotic and destructive nature of the characters in question. If she was going to go, I could just kind of assume that if she was going to go all out, make it all sexy, it was going to turn, all those moments were going to be so chaotically just intense, and we didn't get that. I do think some of it might have ended up getting edited after test screenings, but it is really steering into that tragic romance aspect. The characters feel a lot more redeeming. And by taming it in ways it starts to feel like another classic, there is actually a character that gives a very heated Romeo and Juliet review, which does feel like it's trying to make more of a parallel with this movie than the thing it's supposed to be based off of, but then just being pretty shallow in its execution. I guess I was just expecting to feel more strongly one way or the other with this movie. I am someone who tends to enjoy Emerald Fennell a lot more than most while still understanding the criticism that comes at her. I've covered both Promising Young Woman and Saltburn in detail on this channel. If you want to check those videos out, I'll try to remember to link them down below. And I just felt so mild on so much of this movie. I'm sure if I had more positive experience with the book, I'd be a lot more upset with some of these aspects that I'm going to go through when we're talking about the movie and comparing some of it to the book. But even without that, it just feels like it's missing something. Like the score is amazing. Charlie did an amazing job with that. The intro had me locked in. The set design and costuming is stunning. You can absolutely see the attention to detail and all that. Fennell can articulate for hours every choice that was made there, and you see it. There's a lot of shots that parallel other movies like Gone with the Wind and The Secretary. It's actually pretty funny at times. The yearning is strong. The performances are great for what they're being asked to do. But I just remember I was watching it and actively trying to figure out how I felt while it was going along. Like, there are things that really work, some better if you just separate it from the source material. But then it just started feeling so sterile in certain areas, and like parts of me felt like, oh my god, this is actually really great. I could love this, and others were just kind of like, okay, maybe we got to move this along a little bit, which is honestly nothing I've ever said about an Emerald Fennell movie before. She usually has me locked in, even if it's something that I'm not fully clicking on, I am locked in. But I'll try to go through some of the changes that seem to be the most egregious to the novel. If I'm missing some, feel free to leave them down below. But I'm also going to try to evaluate it as its own thing for the people who don't care about the book and just want to see Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi act up. Because it's definitely doing it for some people. Okay, so right from the get-go, we're getting some major changes. Hindley is not in the story, and they kind of roll his character and purpose into the father, Mr. Earnshaw, which means that changes that entire dynamic too. And because she has no intention of getting us to that next generation, you can kind of start getting rid of some of those characters and rolling them into other ones, taking away some of the major inspirations for revenge from Heathcliff, because they now, rolled all of the gambling and the drinking into the father. You don't get that, like, the hostility between Hindley and Heathcliff anymore. But it's nowhere near as bad as what they're going to do with Isabella's character. She's probably handled the worst in terms of what she is in the novel. You are losing massive elements of that story to soften the edges of some other characters. Then we get into the casting. People have long debated Heathcliff's exact race. Bronte kept it kind of vague beyond him clearly having darker skin. A lot of people have said that this is just to kind of add the air of mystery and the gothic nature to him, but it seems like he's either mixed race from the slave trade, Romani. There's a handful of racial words that have been used to describe him outside just the description of dark. I get that you can put a tan on Jacob Elordi, and that I guess he's from Spain on his paternal side, but it is certainly not fully matching that definition. And I think it's important to keep that in mind because it's a component that's so deeply tied to the story and the social class aspect of it that this book is so fundamentally focused on, like the ideas of social class and like who should be marrying who causes the major, really is the catalyst to set off so much of what goes wrong in the story. So Fennell specifically saying she was taking a colorblind approach was kind of weird. So you got white Heathcliff, you got Asian Nellie, which honestly could have been explored in an interesting way, but they don't really do anything with it. You love Hong Chau though. Then you make Edgar Brown because the actor's of Pakistani descent, but then you just choose not to have any of that be relevant to the story. In a story where it feels like it has to be, this is taking place in the 1770s. How do you take such care to so many of the visual details and then just drop that aspect entirely? I get it, Elordi and Robbie play off each other amazingly. There's a world where this could have been some torrid dark academia disaster with similar themes to Wuthering Heights, but just really going in on that toxic love. Then I guess at that point she'd just be dealing with the same kind of complaints she got about Saltburn being similar to the talented Mr. Ripley. But no, this had to be what she imagined Wuthering Heights to be when she was a teenager. Otherwise, like most adaptations, or at least the ones I've seen, they don't bother doing the framing that this is a story being relayed to someone who becomes our separate narrator. I think it's mostly the television series that keeps Mr. Lockwood because they have more time to work with. But changing that framing does change the story, but I understand why the movies just kind of leave it out. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the movie, which means spoilers if you don't want to know what happens. Spoiler time. But the movie immediately starts with misdirection. It's just a black screen and you hear the sounds of a guy. It kind of sounds like he's doing some stuff in a bed, some very suggestive noises. But then it cuts to show that it's actually a man being hanged, and the kids point out that he seems to have a stiffy. So right from the get-go, it's letting us know that this movie's more sexual elements might be misdirects. But then it's also linking sex to pain and death and the brutality of the situation being witnessed, which I'm guessing is to set up those themes going forward. Fennell specifically quoted as saying she wanted audiences to understand the connection between arousal and danger. And I do appreciate trying to point out the way that this era was very harsh, even when it's so easy to romanticize the Victorian era. I think we forget that, like, people were dropping dead like flies at very young ages back then. But then the whole town just devolves into sexual chaos, everyone with ramped up emotions following a public execution. I have heard that intro was probably more graphic in some test screenings and then changed, but who knows? Now the hanging, which is being watched by a young Katherine Earnshaw and Nellie, who's changed from a housekeeper to being more of a companion, companion for Kathy, doing some servitude duties. I guess Earnshaw took her in as the illegitimate child of a lord. Then that intro just comes ripping in with the Charlie XCX song, where Emerald apparently uses hair from Robbie and Elordi to intertwine into the title card. Say what you will about her, she knocks the title cards out of the park. Like, I get that one of the main complaints about her is style over substance, but at least the style hits. There is some absolutely striking imagery in this movie, I can't lie. All for it to feel terribly sterile at times. But anyways, the next day Earnshaw comes home after a bender with a young boy in tow, who Kathy names Heathcliff after her dead brother. And again, no live brother Hindley either. The two start forming an inseparable friendship, which does seem to bother Nellie to some degree because she used to be Kathy's main companion. Nellie's not getting as hostile as Hindley did towards Heathcliff, but again, totally different dynamic there. In the book, when Earnshaw brings Heathcliff home, he's very kind to him. He seems to have way more of a connection with him than his own son, and that causes a lot of the animosity between Hindley and Heathcliff. However, there is also a theory that Heathcliff is actually Earnshaw's illegitimate son that he's bringing home. The book says that he went to Liverpool for business. He was on foot and was back within 3 days, even though he had horses at his disposal. It didn't seem like he should have been able to get anywhere near that far. Then when Earnshaw gets home with him, he just kind of becomes this adopted child. He's allowed sleeping in the same bed as Hindley and Kathy, which is kind of unheard of, while as Nellie in a similar position doesn't get that same experience. That's not related to this movie, and a lot of people are like, no, I don't believe that, so we will move on. But, you know, it's fun. There's a lot of, this book's been around for so long, and she's been dead. She died before anybody knew she wrote it, so it's not like anybody could ask specific questions. I will say they are really trying to maintain the class differences between Heathcliff and their family. Like, the dad literally says that Heathcliff can be her new pet, like an object that she can do whatever she wants with. And without a Hindley, that means that all of that, like, anger and abuse has to shift to Mr. Earnshaw being the one doling it out, which Heathcliff takes on more of to protect Kathy. So this section is really just building up the friendship, the affection, the childhood love, before cutting ahead to the future, where we have Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi as adults, totally cutting out the teenager aspect of this, so they don't even have that defense for their behavior early on in the story, because they're full-grown adults now. But somehow the writing of this story really makes a lot of those more negative qualities come across as more endearing. There really are only a couple moments that are truly biting and really showing the cruelty that both of them can have. The cruelest thing so far is this damn wig for the attention to detail everywhere else. This thing is rough. It's only around now that the Lintons move in near them. When in the book it's when they were teenagers, and they do not come calling as quickly as Kathy would like, so she eventually makes her way to the Lintons' home after it's become obvious that her father is drinking and gambling all their money away. So she feels like she may need to make that connection to marry for money. So after falling off their barrier wall and hurting her ankle, Katherine needs to stay there until she's well enough to walk. Heathcliff's instantly like, oh, I can go get her and carry her back, and her dad's like, no, you fool, we need this marriage. Very different from the book where the Lintons show up when they're still children. So Kathy does still hurt her ankle when she's young there and has to stay there for weeks on end, but when she comes back, she's mostly bothered by how uncivil Heathcliff is compared to Edgar and his sister Isabella, who is now not his sister, just referred to as his ward, and very infantile. But as mentioned, Edgar is very different from his book counterpart. He is supposed to be this perfect opposition to Heathcliff in every way. He's very white, he has light hair, he has blue eyes, he's much more delicate. They do get the prim and regal nature of him right here, but it is just odd to change such a fundamental element with these characters so severely to just, you can just literally remove race from the equation. The social aspects are still in place, and Shazad Latif is doing a great job in the role, but it is fundamentally changing a major aspect of the story. Now, in the movie, when Katherine returns home, she is transformed, a beautiful gown, jewelry, perfectly put together, which Heathcliff sees and essentially feels that it confirms his worst fears and the resentment that's been building in the 6 weeks she's been gone. Won't have anything to do with her when he's the first person she seeks out, which, you know, I kind of get it, is like brutal for him. He knows what's coming. Not that they stay apart for long. She goes to try to find him and comes across Joseph getting it on with one of the other servants. Quite different from novel Joseph. He is much nicer here and much more sensual. But this is probably the most racy scene. Kathy sees the two of them setting up to go quite rough with a horse bridle in the woman's mouth. And this is Zilla, by the way, one of the housekeepers that's also in the book, just again being used in a very different way. But before it can really get going, Heathcliff shows up and lays his body on top of Katherine's, covering her eyes and mouth so she can't see or react, which really only succeeds in awaking all sorts of sexual deviances in her mind. The sound of kneading bread is given getting her going. She heads off to the moors, the damn moors that I haven't even mentioned yet. The only thing I always remember about Emily Bronte in this damn book is the goddamn moors. Now, this is a moment I thought was going to get pretty racy. He kind of walks in on her, pleasuring herself, and he's sucking her fingers before they've even had time to do their first kiss. But Katherine stops it from happening after he says he'd follow her around like a dog. Romance truly is dead. What else are we here for, Emerald? You're not doing anything else with the story. And by the time Kathy gets back to the house, flustered from her emotions, Linton is there to propose. Oh my god. Back in the day, it really was just like, hey, you're cute. I tolerated you for a few weeks on our little dates. Let's get settled up. She then goes to talk to Nellie about it. She's of course said yes because she feels like she has to, but she knows she can't ever truly love him because of Heathcliff, because they have the same soul. I was clearly on some shit while I was watching this movie because I just have one note in my notebook that says, I'm a Mr. Linton. Don't get tripped up over people who don't appreciate you and the stability you can provide, kings. I get that Edgar has a lot more flaws in the book, but you can't really blame him. His wife is constantly taunting him with another man. In the movie, not so much. While having this conversation with Nellie, though, the emotions get a little bit intense and she starts to attack Nellie for not being loved by anyone. So when Nellie notices that Heathcliff's going to overhear the conversation, she makes sure to restate that Katherine accepted the proposal and sets Katherine up to specifically say that marrying Heathcliff would degrade her. Social class and all. Missing the part where she describes the way she loves him and the classic, because he's more myself than I, whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. Which, let's be real here, is just a lot of big talk if you're not going to do anything about it. I think the movie omits the part where it says that Linton's soul has no similarity, but it's a pretty damn romantic statement, if only it just didn't get twisted into cruelty. So after hearing that, Heathcliff does the one thing he promised to never do: leave. One of the shots that parallels a classic, the dramatically orange-red sky behind him as he takes off on horse, which is like Gone with the Wind. But by the time Kathy wakes up the next morning, she's ready to take back the proposal and let Heathcliff know, but he's already gone. Which makes her miserable, but kind of just pushes her into going along with the wedding. You see the prep, the striking imagery, her walking through the moors in her wedding dress, seeing the devotion and love Edgar seems to feel for her that she doesn't. Even Isabella is obsessed with Kathy. She literally made her a doll that used her own hair as the hair. But they really start to set up the idea that this mansion essentially becomes a prison for Kathy, but it really is a prison of her own design with people that seem to worship her. Edgar even has her room designed for the walls to look like her skin, which they did actually use a bunch of images of Margot Robbie's skin to recreate, which just kind of adds this weird level of obsession to him, downplaying his emotions and ability to see her as her own person. Fennell specifically said that he's someone who likes to collect things, which is also reflected in a lot of Isabella's collecting habits, suggesting that Kathy's just another thing for him to collect. Which really works for a movie where they've only known each other for a month or two, but in the book, they'd known each other since they were 12. There was at least a foundation there for the love that Edgar felt towards her, even if some of it was idealized of what he wanted her to be or thought she could be or thought she was. I will say there are a bunch of interesting designs in this house. There's a hand fireplace, floors that look like resin-covered blood and actually seem wet. All while she dispassionately has intimacy with him until one night she tries to pretend he's Heathcliff, covering her mouth and eyes like that night in the barn. When you think your wife's a little bit freaky, but she's just trying to mimic a non-sexual moment she had with the person she actually loves. There's also a moment in here where Isabella's begging to go to a public hanging, one that's specifically about a woman being hanged and how deeply that affects Kathy. It then cuts from that Christmas where she went back to Wuthering Heights to maybe try to feel some connection to anything, where she just sees her drunken, destitute father insulting her for not having children, but then by next Christmas, she is now pregnant, but then goes back to her room that night to sit on her bed where she crushes a bunch of eggs, which is something she did to Heathcliff one night because she was upset with him. It's been years and this man returns to sneak into her bedroom, urging her to track him down in the moors where he just appears out of the mist. So dramatic, my guy. Upon his return, it's clear that he seems to be rich now. I think they later reveal that it's through gambling. I think the book leaves a little bit more ambiguous that it could have been through a variety of not as savory means. Pulling some Gatsby shit, or I guess Gatsby pulled some Heathcliff shit by buying Wuthering Heights to be close by. And the passion in this reconnection is just instant, to the point she invites him to dinner. Girl, what are you doing? People aren't playthings. And there's like a line later on where she's like, no, I named him. He's mine. She does see him as this object for her to own. But playthings are literally what all the people around them become, leading into a pretty brutal interpretation of Isabella, who is instantly into Heathcliff. Something that Katherine becomes quite cruel about, probably one of the only areas she is really cruel in this movie, because it doesn't matter that she's married, Heathcliff is hers. And they work so hard to make this whole section seem pretty romantic over the cruelty that Heathcliff immediately immediately starts in with in the book. They have this back and forth where he's like, I didn't break your heart, you broke my heart, and that hurt yours in return. Leading to the first kiss, which quickly escalates to them having sex all over the place, all around the moors, which again, does not happen in the books. It's just a lot of destructive yearning over there. And while they're on these different escapades, she has never let him know that she's pregnant. Obviously, this isn't sustainable and some of the drama starts to seep in. He assumed that she knew that Nellie knew he was listening in that night when she was proposed to, but she didn't, so that makes her go to banish Nellie away, blaming her for Heathcliff leaving and the life she now feels trapped in. This movie really steers into Nellie being a meddler. That avenue, she immediately goes to Edgar to tell him about the dalliances that Catherine's been having with Heathcliff so she doesn't have to leave. So Edgar forbids her from ever seeing Heathcliff, still letting her off the hook on it all by saying that Heathcliff was taking advantage of her good-heartedness. So when she doesn't show up for their meeting, Heathcliff chucks something at the window for attention. She tells Edgar that it was probably a bird, so she wants to go check on it to make sure it doesn't suffer, which I feel is that she just wanted to go outside and explain herself to Heathcliff so he doesn't have to suffer. At this point, he overhears that she's pregnant, and even after finding out that the kid isn't his because she was pregnant before he got back, he doesn't mind. If anything, it made him feel like he was cucking Edgar even more. Edgar, who's been nothing but nice to him at this point and not a bad man at all, and, still doesn't stop Heathcliff from going on this whole foreplay rant saying he'd kill Edgar to get to her, which actually does end up making Katherine shut it all down, saying that he's now too late to have her, even though she started this toxic foreplay by taunting Heathcliff with Edgar. So he immediately goes to hook up with Isabella because he knows it'll bother Kathy the most. Openly telling Isabella that he's going to be cruel, that he'll never love her, that it would just be to torment Kathy, that he'd be thinking of Kathy every moment they were together, and she agrees to it all, so they go elope the next morning. A major difference from the book where she has no idea she's being used until it's too late, just sees him as romantic and brooding. It's once they elope that she realizes how cruel he is. The movie does include her writing the letters to Nellie detailing how abusive he is, but it also changes it to have Heathcliff dictating that treatment in the letters, hoping that it would find its way to Kathy so that she might try to do something to save Isabella from this fate, to leave Edgar and be with him to stop it all. Then they take it even further to just fundamentally change that abuse that Isabella faced, because they just turn it into this quirky BDSM thing where she's chained up acting like a dog, like that scene in The Secretary, making it seem like the more sensual fucked up kind of toxic instead of the disgusting cruel abuse where Heathcliff hangs her dog over a chair almost immediately after they get married. I get that it's hard to present someone who's this monstrous in a romantic way, but that should have probably been the indication that you shouldn't completely steer into the romance aspect. They are both horrible people. And as if to try to make up for this and give her more autonomy in the situation, they let Isabella insult him for not being able to read, and that's why she's the one who has to write out these letters, because I guess they're really just trying to make it seem like she's less of a victim. All happening while Catherine's just been weeping around the house at the loss of Heathcliff to Edgar's ire, leading to her being closed off in her room as some kind of punishment until she gets over it because he shouldn't have to see that, and Nellie's really encouraging him to do that. But when that letter to Nellie goes unanswered, Heathcliff tells Isabella to write something directly to Kathy, which never actually reaches her because Nellie starts to burn them. As Katherine just falls deeper and deeper into despair, writing that classic Katherine Earnshaw, Katherine Linton, Katherine Heathcliff, who she was born, who she became, and who she wants to be. And unlike the book where she dies in childbirth, they completely close off the future by having the baby die inside her, ignored long enough for it to go septic. I do feel like back then the chances of her surviving, even if it was addressed immediately, seemed kinda low, but still leads to some strikingly tragic imagery, trying to use leeches to suck out the toxins, blood just spilling from her body in death. In the book, she's also been neglecting her health and well-being for months, and that just leads to the baby being born 2 months early, and then she dies after a final confrontation with Heathcliff when he is aware that it's very clear that she's gonna die. In the movie, he never has the chance to see her again before her death. By the time he hears she's dying, he can't make it there in time. Getting there almost immediately after it happens, begging her to haunt him in any form and not leave him where he can't find her, is being played very romantically here in the movie. The book, it feels a lot more petulant and selfish, like he doesn't want her to have peace in the afterlife, doesn't want her to rest as long as he's still alive. And between that and the final conversation he has with Kathy, it really just shows how selfish they both are. But she does seem to haunt him until his death. We don't get to see that in the movie though, because there is no continued generation in the book. He and Isabella also also have a child, and that's why you start getting a new loop that you just kind of hope gets closed before that trauma can repeat. So instead, the movie's just showing us this like romantic montage of their love through the movie, ending on a moment of them as children right after Heathcliff got a beating for, taking blame for something Katherine did, and he thinks she's asleep and says that he'll love her forever and after, which she hears and smiles. Yeah, they really found a way to try to make it sweet and tender instead of really honing in on the abusive monsters they are. And for how messed up everybody tried to say that this version was going to be, they cut out some of the stuff that was the most messed up, especially for the time it was written, just cutting out the part where he digs up her grave to try to lay next to her dead body, hoping they decayed together. But hey, maybe that's something you can only pull off one time in your filmography, and she used it on Saltburn. So yeah, this does really just end up feeling like a very dark, tragic fan fiction of Wuthering Heights, honing in on the intensity of the dramatic love and really downplaying how horrendous they are as people. Like, they even try to make the fact that like Heathcliff is very cruel and is planning on torturing Isabella. They turned it into this kind of like sexy thing, which it is not. And then they only really let Kathy be cruel a couple times, and even that doesn't reach the heights it's supposed to. Movie Katherine actually listens to Edgar's request to stay away from Heathcliff as best as she can. Book Katherine taunts him with Heathcliff. And I feel like that just would have made this movie way more interesting. The way it's set up just undercuts so much of what it could have been. And I do feel like that leads to it getting pretty bland at times, even if you do cut it off from the source material. Because we don't get the next generation. We don't see the tortured, haunted Heathcliff. We don't get any of the ghosts. I get that we're kind of in the era of movies doing the whole generational trauma thing, but the way this engages with it is so interesting, where you're letting those characters be just as terrible as what made them be that way in the first place. I think without having that next generation and missing out on what can be considered as the loop closing, while they're set up in a way that it could all just repeat itself with the same obsessions and the same cruelty as a result of that abuse, this just completely avoids that. This movie is definitely romanticizing how big and deep their love was, which is something the book isn't actually making a statement on. It's not meant to mean more because of how intense it was. It really showed how selfish and destructive it was. It hurt them, the people around them, made them commit horrible acts, and they were even cruel to each other if it meant that they had a chance at getting what they wanted. This is not a love you should ever hope finds you. You want to be loved by someone who ultimately wants the best for you and your life, regardless of what it might mean for them. Yeah, you read this book and wish they had just gotten together because that would have kept them away from other people, and maybe things wouldn't have gotten to the disastrous heights they did. They could have just been, selfish together. It might have just really sucked for their children dealing with that level of narcissism in parents. This movie really does just let it all exist in this realm of passion where there is some guilt on Kathy's side. She doesn't like that she's committing infidelity, versus the book version who is so selfish as to want both the passion of Heathcliff and the stability of Edgar. But that's really going to do it for the movie. Let me know what you're thinking down below. I know some people are really enjoying this because they've never read the book, so they can just kind of like take this as this dark romance. But even as that, I found that there were so many areas of this that were lackluster. They cut out different characters, they blend people together, they don't do the second half of the book. You think that that's so that they could find more time to fit in more themes, but this is like a 2-hour movie where it strips it down to, again, the 14-year-old version of this that was able to romanticize all these different aspects that are truly horrific. And honestly, based on the movies that she's made before, I actually would have felt very comfortable with Emerald making that very selfish love, that chaotic love, the destruction of people around them, the selfishness of it all. And that's just not what we get. So it mostly just feels like there's entire sections of wasted time in this. The ending did get me. I did have some emotional reactions where I almost cried because I'm like, yeah, it's doing a good job. It's expressing things in this way that is tragic. It just could have been so much more. But let me know what you guys are thinking down below. Are you a fan of the book? Do you hate the book and hate the movie? Do you hate the book and like the movie? Do you love the book and hate the movie? Do you actually really love the book and still find love for this and what it is because you can separate it enough? Let me know down below. But that's going to do it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. Thanks as always to my Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Leave a like on the video if you're into that kind of thing. All my other social medias are listed down below. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I'm mostly okay, and we'll catch you all later.